Hello, Brian. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex, for having me on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this.
Awesome. Me too. Me too. It's been a busy day over here, but this has been one in my calendar that I've been looking forward to. Been checking out your website and your profile, but tell the audience, if you may, a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of what I do, I am an entrepreneur and I also coach other athletic entrepreneurs and professionals in basically the spaces of mental training and personal performance.
Mental training and personal performance. Awesome. So, Brian, I'd love to learn more about how you got into that. How did you become a peak performance coach?
Sure. Well, I'll harken back a little bit because I know a lot of the work that you do and I appreciate it. And, having the opportunity to listen to your show and glean a lot of wisdom. A little bit of background that's probably relevant for me. I remember I was in middle school and I don't know if we were, for some reason, a bunch of us were like at the pool or something. And I remember some of my female friends that I was hanging out with, and they were like gawking over this dude that, they were all fired up about his body and his six pack. I remember that specifically. And I'm sitting there looking at myself and I was like, ugh. Oh no, I don't have any of that. And so it was interesting because I kind of got shamed into being more interested in health and fitness. And honestly, that was kind of the genesis of it. So I know there's all this stuff about, it's not nice to shame people, but part of that is the responsibility on our end. If something like that happens, what do we do with that information? And for me, I took that as a catalyst to go, this is something that's unacceptable to me. And it's kind of started me on this journey. And of course, stayed in like health and fitness stuff. I got my personal training certification before I graduated high school. And I went and, well, okay, so I worked in a health club and I was doing training for the general public. At the same time, I was also interning at the university with the strength and conditioning staff, primarily working with the football team. And I found out very early on that I really, really, really loved the mentality and just the presence that athletes brought to the table. I loved the training at the university, working with the team, the athletes, working with the general public. It was like, come on, people. I mean, some of them were absolutely fantastic, but some of them is pushing a limp noodle. I'm like, okay, you if you want to look like that, you can't dictate the terms of how you get to look like that, right? So you can downgrade what you want to do and accomplish, but we've got to kind of marry up those things in terms of how much effort and time you want to put into that and focus on nutrition and making sure that that's dialed in. Those things have to be in alignment. So all of that to say, I learned early on, I loved working with high performing people. And of course, went through college, graduated with a degree in psychology. Somewhere along the way, because even though I always loved coaching people, I also had a gift for working with dogs, built up a couple businesses in the dog training, behavior rehabilitation, as well as the daycare and dog boarding space. And once we had management in place and I had a good team going, I was able to kind of circle back around to my first love, which brings me to the answer to your question of performance coaching, purpose-built business designed to where I could really serve people and go deep with them in terms of psychology and strategy and getting those things really tuned up for high performing enterprising people that are looking to get, just that little extra edge, because there's that law of diminishing return. The farther you get along, the harder you have to work for smaller benefit. In the beginning, you can make a ton of progress with something and it's very encouraging. And somewhere along the way, there's just a lot of attrition typically because people don't jive well with the idea of, gosh, I'm working really hard and I'm not seeing the results that I used to, not appreciating what they really are accomplishing. And most people never even get to that level to where they have diminishing returns. They just have big returns and then they fall backward and then big returns, and it's the whole yo-yo thing. And I know you talk a lot about that and what you do. So anyway, that's kind of how I got into the performance thing. I work with entrepreneurs and professionals that are also typically very athletic because I'm a competitive athlete myself. I understand that mentality. So that's kind of my niche, if you will.
Awesome. That's super interesting. So I'm super interested in hearing how you worked with the general population, and then at the same time, if I understood correctly, you're interning with the university football team. What would you say were the key differences, I guess, between those? Maybe in terms of mentality or any other?
Yep. The athletes came to play, and the general population was kind of coming to. It was just a different level of desire that they had, and one of the biggest things. Well, I'll talk about that later. So I'll talk about that later. But the biggest thing is when you're working with athletes, there's a mentality to something like that versus somebody just wanting to get in better shape, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what people have to really ask themselves is, how compelling is that when the crap hits the fan and you're 6 weeks into this deal and you're kind of sick and you're not feeling it, or you didn't get a lot of sleep because your kids kept you up all night, et cetera, et cetera. What is going to keep you going no matter what, to where it wouldn't even be a question in your mind? Are you going to show up and put in the work? And the athletes had batteries included. The general population, by and large, did not. And anybody can have it, but there was a more compelling reason on the athlete side. They have things like deadlines. They have to show up for game day. They put themselves on the spot. And if they don't work, it shows up in a big way in a public square. And I think that's honestly a lot of it is, what are the stakes for you? And not necessarily in a high pressure cooker situation. That's not what I'm saying, but what is it going to take for you to really put yourself in a position where there's a lot of positive pressure that's, you don't start cycling in your head, do I really feel like it? Because there's days I don't feel like doing stuff, training, whatever, but it's never an actual question. It's not like I would never actually ask myself the question, maybe I should just take the day off. Like, that wouldn't occur to me. I have way lighter days, but that, I think that's part of the difference. So I hope that helps a little bit. It's just the athletes were coming to play. They had batteries included. They had a really, really strong set of reasons that would drive them to go through the training that they needed to change their diets, to have a different lifestyle that was in alignment with their goals.
That's really interesting. I love the phrase you use, came with batteries included. That's that's such a good phrase. I was interviewing Ramona Braganza a couple of days ago, who is a celebrity trainer. She trained Anne Hathaway, Jessica Alba, loads of other names. They'll elude my memory right now. But she was saying when they came off set, 'cause often they come off set at the end of the day, and they were going to do a workout in her workout trailer that she has, which is completely awesome. And she said, I actually loved it because they would come in and they were just like, right, this is my 40 minutes or this is my hour. Off I go. This is my workout. There's no chit chat. There's no messing around. It's that level of intention coming into that. So how can someone, let's say the general population, how can they start to bring that level of intention to, let's say, their exercise sessions or their routine?
Sure. I think there's a lot of different answers to that, potentially, depending on the angle you're approaching it from. But I can tell you what comes to mind for me is, you have to come up with ways to get out of your own head. If you're like you were just saying with, Anne Hathaway, and they come off set, there's not deliberation about what they're doing next. And they don't spend 15 minutes talking, standing around probably, questioning in their own head. It's just something that they go and do. And that's a training thing. I do a lot with mental training, which is really the bedrock of everything else that we do. If our psychology and our, even our spirituality and stuff, if they're not lined up, we're not going to have any power flowing through, and we're going to spin cycles in our head. And is it really worth it? And that type of thing. So I think one thing is training yourself to, like, let me give you an example. there's a phenomenon when I go to the pool to train that is very, very common, where swimmers by and large, or people that go to swim at the pool, hate jumping in, especially if it's competition ready, because the water is cold. It's not, the Arthritis Foundation warm water at the local center, right? It's cold. And I just decided a long time ago, I'm not going to stand on the pool deck like everybody else whining about, oh, this is the worst part of it. I just train myself. Freaking awesome. Nobody else likes doing this, so I'm going to be the one. And I don't stand there. I don't deliberate. I've trained myself. I don't care if I've trained my mind. I make that decision and I go. And if my body doesn't like it, it will catch up and it will figure things out. That type of a simple decision might sound trivial, but then you start extrapolating that out to other areas, right? Should I skip my meal prep this week? Why is that even a question in your head, right? And if it is, that's good to ask. Why would I even be asking myself that? How can I bolster my why behind all of this so it's even more powerful? Or maybe I need to put some, checkpoints in place down the road where I've opened my big mouth and told some people what's going to happen by a certain date. You have to know how you operate. And so it's different for everyone. As much as, my company is Bergford Performance Systems, their systems are really more frameworks, and they're customized around the people, because we all have different ways our bodies respond differently to things. And you have to know you and what drives you. And I will tell you that nothing transformational and change-worthy happens in comfortable conditions. So if you're always looking for comfort and moving to the next thing and hanging with a group of friends that makes you feel good, that's fine, but don't necessarily expect the upward personal evolution to be happening either.
That's so interesting. And you touched on that before with the general public wanting to look like, having this dream goal in their head, probably some model in a magazine or something that they've seen, and then thinking they can do that with half-assed workouts that they're doing twice a week or something.
And it's tough too, because you have these models for this, these health products or these fitness programs, and I'm looking at that going, what a load of crap. There's no way that person, as gorgeous as they are, with that kind of a body, that, like, if you saw them on the street, you'd just be like, what is happening, right? They look so amazing. They're so toned. They're so fit. And they're models for these products, which makes sense. But then for me to run out there, that would be like, me saying, I'm really committed to going to the Olympics the next time it comes around. And it's like, no, like, I have businesses and stuff like that. I know I'm not going to the Olympics except to maybe spectate. And I'm fine with that. So you want to look at, what do you really value and why is it important? Do you really need to look like the person on the front of the magazine? If so, and there may be nothing wrong with that. Like, that may be a great goal and it may be really compelling. Sometimes people are looking at stuff like that for reasons they're not even consciously aware. What's beneath that? Is it an insecurity thing? Is it, because for me, my fitness thing, it all started with the insecurity and kind of being a little, having my feathers ruffled about, look at the guy over there, my lady friends that I thought were fairly attractive, talking about, his body and everything. So something can start there, but at some point you have to turn a corner and find something that has a deeper meaning and deeper purpose, because the more shallow your roots, the easier things can tip over on you. You want to go deep. You want to have a really wide network of reasons and roots that are meaningful to you. And that's how you hold things up over time.
I love that analogy, that if you have a shallow why, I guess this comes down to finding your why. If you have a shallow why, then it's easier. I think of a tree, like, that's easier to blow over rather than a why or a tree that's got roots, that's been stood there for hundreds of years and has roots absolutely everywhere. That's not coming out of the ground very easily at all.
Exactly. And everybody wants to have a really, really deep, powerful, but singular why. Root systems have a lot of roots. That's one of the other secrets, is you have, yes, a tap root. You might have your deepest thing going down, but you have a lot of feeder roots too. And so you have to be creative with that, especially if you go to train one day and you're not really feeling it. What else can you tap into? Because you may not be feeling even that really deep why at the moment, but if you can just pick up on one little glimmer over here of, look at that person over there, gosh, they're not even, they don't even look like they're as fit as I am, and they're having trouble breathing like crazy. And gosh, look how much they're putting into their exercise. I could do like 1 or 2% more than what I'm doing right now. Just little things and finding excuses to go farther instead of finding excuses to drop out.
Amazing. Yeah, such a great point. How do you go about finding those whys, that deep root, and then maybe the sort of other roots that are branching off that?
It's a good question. Sometimes your why pops up just because of life circumstances and it hits you like a 2x4 and you don't have a choice. Right? It comes at you. Other times, if you want to be really proactive about it, I have found a lot of that has to do with looking and being comfortable looking internally and understanding yourself. And what are the common threads and themes that really make my engine get going? A lot of people don't spend nearly enough time holding that introspective space for themselves, or going and working with somebody like a coach or a therapist or whatever to find that. I will tell people that I think when it comes to performance, you have to know that if you're looking to create something different in the future, the emphasis needs to be more on future stuff, right? Not wallowing in the past. And so there's a place for each. Therapy is more about clearing up, creating some understanding and clarity. But then I also always want to tell people, you need to move forward very quickly. It's so easy to get stuck in the past, and people get completely infatuated with their problems and the things that happen to them, and nobody understands my story. And everybody feels that way, right? And so the thing is, having that forward-looking view is tremendously important, but it comes back to understanding yourself, what makes you tick. And then one other thing I would throw in is, just because something can make you perform better doesn't mean that it's healthy. There are plenty of people that achieve tremendous results, whether that's in their health and fitness or finances, business, yada, 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 but it's not healthy. It's not sustainable. They're being driven by something that's eventually going to eat them alive because the fuel system is caustic. And so it's identifying what you're being driven by, but then sometimes transmuting that and turning it into something that's a little bit more productive, that's more sustainable. For instance, love is much more sustainable than hate as something to drive you. If you love doing something, it's much more sustainable and healthy in the long term to pursue that thing versus using hate and fear as your fuel. Hate and fear, don't get me wrong, like that can spark things for you. And sometimes it does. Not everything starts out as this beautiful, like, I just love the human race and I just want to help other people and I'm just so spiritual that's, sometimes it's a really, really selfish reason, and that's fine. But don't use short-term strategies across the long term. They're short-term for a reason, and if we're not clear on that, we can get ourselves backed into a corner pretty quick.
That's brilliant. I love that. I think what you shared there and then at the start as well really resonated with me, because the reason I got into kind of looking after my health and well-being, when it really boils down to it, it was to impress women, right? I was a skinny kid, didn't have any muscle on me, and I wanted to be one of the muscular guys who girls looked at, and so sparked my 12-year journey to 14-year journey to try and actually gain some muscle. But I guess that was a negative driver, but it kick-started things, and then over time I fell in love with the process of especially with weightlifting. It was like I go in every session and I go, right, last week I did this week I'm going to try and beat that just a little bit. I'm going to try and pick up a heavy weight. I'm going to squeeze out an extra rep or something. So I like to think I have made that more sustainable shift from it being kind of more, I don't want to say hatred fueled, but quite negatively fueled, to being now a more positive sort of pursuit of progression, basically, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't sometimes what gets you started is not pretty. It's not the most beautiful, like I said, motive in the world, and that's okay. Sometimes it's just get started, find an excuse, get pissed about something, but start. And then as you're going along, start to get some of those roots, have them be more diverse so that you can feed off of different areas, and then you can let that other stuff atrophy over time. Don't get me wrong, from a competitive standpoint, I will still use things like anger big time to fuel me in moments, but that is not the baseline day-to-day fuel that I use, because after a while you burn up, it creates other issues, psychological stuff, and then you start having problems in other areas of your life. And I know this because I've done it all wrong. And that's really a lot of where things come from, right? Is our experience of what does and doesn't work through the school of hard knocks. And, that's what experience and wisdom is all about.
So many of us coaches are here because we failed in a previous life or previous years, often again, and it's always that repetition of failure that has driven us to where we are now. Is for me. So am I right in understanding you're a swimmer? You're a competitive swimmer?
Yes. That's my athletic field. I mean, I wasn't actually, ironically, an athlete in my younger years. I wasn't. Like, I didn't do middle school, high school, college, anything. I just kind of started swimming initially because I had just kind of keeping in shape, a running injury pop up, and I took on swimming because I had to, because it was the only thing that didn't kill my knee. But that was very short lived. I got out of the pool as soon as I could, but I kind of came back to it later because I realized I've had this phobia of having my head underwater since I was a little kid. Since as early as I can remember. I don't really know where that's from. It is what it is, but it was like a panic phobia thing, not just, I would prefer not to have my head in water. It makes me scared. And I got to the point where I was fed up with that and decided, yep, we're going to deal with this, and we're going to feed fear a suck it sandwich. So I went and got a coach, learned how to do all the different competitive strokes. And one day after my lesson with my coach, he said, "You're ready to join a master's team." And that completely terrified me when he said that. However, I know the nature of how the mind works and rationalization and letting ourselves off the hook. So before I could let myself off the hook, I ran out. I joined a master's team right away. I think it was either that day or the next day, and just started from there, and then started competing. But I didn't start swimming until I was 30, was when I learned how to do it. And then decided at one point, maybe I could compete one day. And then I competed, and I was like, that was amazing. And then got this crazy idea that, wow, wouldn't it be incredible if I qualified for the national championships one day in my life? And that was something that really, one of those positive drivers. The day-to-day drivers sometimes were little things, just irritations and like, fine, I'll take it out in the pool, But long-term, I had this vision of, wow, if I could go to nationals, that would be cool. And that might inspire somebody else who's maybe struggling with something to say, if that person can do that, I can go a little bit further. And don't despise small beginnings. Sometimes it's just that seemingly insignificant decision of, I could go a little further. That's where the magic happens, but it's not sexy, and it's not the day-to-day grind in the trenches. that's not fun. Everybody likes the spotlight. Everybody likes to see people in the arena, but not the day-to-day blood, sweat, and lots of tears stuff. And people need to give themselves credit. Sometimes people show up and they'll go train and they're like, oh, I'm really not feeling it today, etc. I'm like, you're here. The rest of the world is at home on the couch. Like, that's amazing. Give yourself some credit. And maybe one of the reasons some people don't get more out of themselves than they would like to is beating themselves up constantly, or just omitting the giving of credit to themselves. Give yourself credit. If you need to keep a journal for yourself, and give yourself credit even every time you do something that might even seem insignificant. When you look at what you're really doing every day that you're doing right, if you're somebody that beats themselves up all the time, that can build tremendous momentum. Now, if you're having issues with motivation, or you feel like you're lazy, or whatever the thing is, like, fine, but reach out, get coaching, get help, whatever you need. And especially for you, Alex, right? Like, people have you as a resource. And if it's not that, at least find a group of people that inspires and challenges you, that being around them in and of itself is going to help you raise your game.
Wow, there's so many great points that you touched on there. The one that really stood out that aligns especially with with my approach is, can you push just a little bit further? Just a little bit. Maybe take your, 10 press ups to 11 press ups, from 10-minute walk to a 12-minute walk. But that's really, as you said, that's where the magic happens. That's where you do that day in, day out, consistently strive with that mentality, and that's how Olympians get to where they are. I guess they're constantly striving for slightly better, not to transform overnight. So
Right. And expand your mind. I love that you said that. Do one more thing, and you're not going to feel every day 100% at the top of your game. So it's eking out that one more when I've kind of done what I chose to do and what I feel I kind of set out to do and obligated to do, quote unquote. But I'm just going to do that like a little extra, whether it's an extra rep, because that's the mental fitness we talked about, and doing the little, okay, great health and really bad health are not normally either amazing singular choices or catastrophic single choices. They're just a whole host of choices all piled up together. And every time you do something that's taking a step in the right direction, that's a huge thing. And sometimes, like you said, it's just one more press up, whatever. Keep it simple. But do just a little bit more, because then you start to identify yourself as the person who goes just a little bit extra, and that's going to have an effect long term. If I swim an extra, which I normally do, I'll swim like an extra 100 meters beyond whatever it is I set out to actually do when my workout is completed. That adds up, because if I'm swimming 5 days a week times 100 meters, I'm not going to do math live because I'm going to embarrass myself, but everyone else can do the math. It actually adds up over the course of 52 weeks. That's a lot. And I remember Michael Phelps talking about that piece where he said everybody else in the sport was going 6 days on and 1 day off. And I was going 7 days on, which meant I got 52 extra days of training every single year. And that little bit, might that be what, maybe put him across, and he beat somebody multiple times by, a 100th of a second? Yes, it's diminishing returns, but by being the person that did one extra, pain is temporary, glory is forever, and he understood that. And I think that's what you're helping people understand too, Alex, is just do the little extra.
Amazing. Yeah, that's such a good example with Michael Phelps. I guess there is times when additional training is going to cause you to go negatively if you've gone too far. But
oh yeah,
I guess in his world, his entire life revolves around recovering from the training that he's just done. So
right. Yes.
Quite a specific case where he can definitely do that. And you touched on earlier a few times that I think there's a lot of power. It's very underrated. It's almost the power of making quick decisions, sort of like in the moment. Like you walk out to the pool, you know it's cold, but before you've even had a chance to, how should we say, logically rationalize it or emotionally start to talk yourself out of it, you're in the pool. Can you talk a little bit more around that and the sort of power of that, if you will?
Sure. It's just know when it's time to think and when it's time to move. Most people get themselves all crossed up because they're moving when they should be thinking and thinking when they should be moving. Now, that's easier said than done, but I think if people just sit with that and really order that out, they'll get a lot of benefit. How many times in our life, I can speak for me because I was doing this yesterday and I was like, come on, dude, you know better than this. I don't even remember what the task was. It's like I made it a big deal in my head. I made it a super big deal in my head. I was dreading it because I was thinking when I should have just been diving in and doing. And that's one of the magical pieces sometimes about getting a little bit frustrated. Sometimes you just go into yourself, screw it, I'm going. And you just go and you stop questioning because you can't even put up with one more second of whatever's going on. And you start acting on things. And there's so much magic in that. We make everything into a big deal sometimes and blow it up in our minds, and then we start to have to rationalize why we're not taking action and doing things. And it's like, if you would just, this is one of those times when you get in this position where you need to stop using your brain and just command your body to go. And again, that's a mental fitness thing. And the more and more you do that, that plays out really well in sport, in health and fitness, in life, in business. And it's not that life doesn't stop most people. They stop themselves and then they blame life and other people and society's problems and everything in that group over there and what's going on in the world. And it's like, just freaking go and stop complaining, because even if all the things you just said are true, how is that going to help you? I don't like this whole thing about, just the victim card being constantly played, whether for ourselves or other people. I'm like, how is that helping those people to continue telling them they're victims? Even if it's true, if you identify as a victim and you keep hearing that enough times, are you going to get up and go the distance? No, because you're going to feel the heaviness and the weight. And so there may be some factual truth to sometimes. This is the difference between fault and responsibility. Something might not be my fault, but it's my responsibility now, so I need to deal with it. And if we can keep things like that straight, it makes it much easier to just move forward and take action when we need to, instead of getting stuck in our head.
Yeah, love it, love it. I just love what you're saying. It's so relatable. I'm trying. Well, I say trying. I've done it now for probably 45 days in a row or so. At the end of every shower that I have, I will turn the temperature right down. So I'm standing in a not freezing cold, but it feels freezing cold.
Yes.
And every time I get towards the end of my shower, I'm enjoying it, nice and warm. Oh, it's the best. And then I go, okay, this is it. Now's the time. I could just step out the shower. I've never stepped out the shower with it being hot. I've always turned it down. But there's that conversation. And I try and sometimes trick myself and just take action, just turn it cold before I've even had this conversation in my head. But I know that by doing that, I'm starting every single day, even if I don't like it. I feel great afterwards. So it's partly delayed gratification, kind of training that muscle, but just doing it so every day, it's like proving to myself I'm starting to build this identity of someone who is more mentally resilient, who can do the things that they don't want to when they know it's good for them. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that definitely resonates there. Something you've touched on a few times in the conversation, and just then, especially with this victim mentality and this whole complaining versus kind of taking responsibility and taking action. I think it really kind of aligns with tailoring your environment, taking control of your environment. Like, we've all got friends, or perhaps had friends, who are those complainers. And there's many different aspects of your environment and controlling your environment, but I think a really key one is the people who you hang around with. And if I was hanging around a group of complainers all the time, what am I going to do all the time? I'm going to complain just like them, because that's what feels almost like safe to me. Whereas if the people around me just don't, then I'm going to go, oh, actually, it's not a big deal. I'm just going to just turn my brain off and take action, as you say. So.
Yes. And it's a great point you bring up. It's something that I feel obviously foundational in terms of importance to performance, to leading the life you want. One little twist that I think we could put on that is looking at what kind of person am I to tolerate blank? To tolerate spending my precious time hanging out with people who complain. We're not talking about disowning people, that's different, but the most precious commodity any of us have is our time, and also, frankly, our mental space. And if people are occupying mind space and not paying rent, we might want to look at that, because we have to pay the consequences of tolerating that type of thing. And it's not about setting other people straight. It's about looking at, why are these people in my life? Why are they occupying as much of my calendar as they are? I don't have to spend tons and tons of time with people to love them, to be friends with them. But it says a lot about any of us, the things that we put up with in our life. And that doesn't mean that we're resigned to it. If you've been putting up with something, we all do it. We all have areas where it's like, oh my God, I really need to do this, or I need to get rid of this. And at any moment, we can become the person who no longer tolerates that low standard from ourselves. And it's important at this juncture not to start to throw our stuff on other people and make ourselves the victim of, well, if I hadn't been around this group of friends for this long, you're the one who hung out with that group of friends. I grew up with these friends. Awesome. But you're a grown-up now. So maybe we have to switch some things up. And by the way, I'm totally talking to myself here, right? Like, this is part of how I get myself kind of fired up, and just looking and evaluating at things at a more nuanced level is talking like this. So I definitely don't want it to come across as like I'm talking at other people. Like, this gets me fired up to look at where am I making excuses for myself and tolerating substandard crap in my life that really has no place there. If who I say I want to become, I'm really serious about it. And I'm not just pulling the, I want to look like this person on the magazine thing.
I guess it comes down to not dwelling in the past and focusing on the future and moving forward. It's like, sure, these were my friends from childhood, for example, but I want to live a certain life and I have certain goals. Are they going to help me get there? Probably not. And therefore, that person, that version of me in the future, is probably surrounded by more supportive people. So,
yeah.
Brian, what is one myth in your field, in your area, that you would like to bust?
I don't know if this is a myth so much, but people definitely, because I'll tell them what I do, and then they're trying to wrap it up into something that they're more familiar with. So they'll go like, oh, you're a life coach. I'm like, no. I'm specifically working with people that are really high achievers already. It's a very different type of a thing, right, to me, and it's that version of, me working with, back then as a trainer with athletes versus kind of the general public, right? It's like these people, going back to that thing you said with that you liked, people are coming to me with batteries included. that type of coaching relationship works out. What doesn't work out is the batteries not included. Great, like go talk to these people. And and this goes back to knowing ourselves and what we're good at. I can help anybody, but I feel like I'm at my highest service point where I'm really working with the people that for whatever reason I feel a draw to, and that I feel that connection with. And so I feel like this idea of doing performance coaching and mental training for kind of high achievers getting kind of whittled down into like, oh, you do like life coaching. I'm like, it's a little bit different, and they both have a place and they're both super important, but that's kind of that's a thing that pops up typically. And so it may not be a myth, but I do run up against it a fair amount.
That's a really good point. Really good point. And it resonates a lot with me, because one of the reasons I kind of changed who I work with and went through I guess a year or so kind of work with different people going, are you right for me? Do I feel at my best? Does this excite me most? And not really. Move on to the next. And so I went on this whole journey of, I guess, like really trialing and working and chatting with different audiences, was to find the people who I get on a call with and I'm like, this is awesome, this is so exciting, this is exactly what I want to be doing. And I can help them the most because they are, we're just bouncing off each other. We have the same level of values and sort of priorities and stuff. So yes. I can definitely resonate.
And let me say one other thing really, really quick off of that, because when you were speaking to it, I just thought this is so important. Everything great in terms of progress in life, it happens in the context of a relationship. So the relationship we have in our lives and the quality of our relationships and how we select those things is tremendously important. And sometimes those relationships are just whatever it is. If it's a coaching relationship, you with clients, if it's got to have some chemistry and it's got to have a right feel to it. Because again, as social creatures and social beings, we get into a lot of trouble when we isolate ourselves. That is very, very, very dangerous, especially if people are prone to anxiety and depression and different things like that. Isolating yourself is like the worst thing ever. And sometimes you are one or two relationships away from having the breakthrough you want, but you're going to have to make that move to step forward and step out and seek that relationship, or just put it out there and trust that it's going to show up. But relationships are everything, so pay real close attention to that.
It's a very important point right now, as half the world is in lockdown and spending significantly more time isolated away from others. So.
Yeah,
absolutely. Wow. I want to ask my favorite question. If you could get the entire world population to do one thing every day, what would it be and why?
Great. So one thing, this is me being creative with answering your question. So I'm not following the rules exactly. Probably meditation and prayer. So I would combine that into praytation or some kind of a word like that. I tend to combine those two things. If we actually had, think about it, if we had an entire world that was doing that, and not in a scripted, it's got to be according to this certain doctrine way, just a true from the heart desire to become a better person, to pursue the truth with a capital T, and to be like a dog on a bone with that. And it would be so much different, right? If everybody was doing that kind of thing. And I think one of the elements that's crucial to that recipe being right is spending time in felt gratitude every single day. Felt gratitude, not intellectual gratitude, and making a list of things I'm grateful for. It doesn't matter. Here's a key. If you don't feel something, if you don't experience it, it's not real. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Something can be real if I haven't experienced it or felt it. It's not real for you. If you want it to be real for you, you have to feel it and experience it. So if you want gratitude in your life, it has to be felt. And then taking all that power from, your prayer, your meditation, contemplation, practice, whatever you want to call it, and making sure you're deliberately coming to a place where you're experiencing love and sending love to people, even the people that you don't like, that you want to punch in the face. Honest to God, if everybody was doing that every single day, even if it was a 5 or a 10-minute discipline, I sense there would be a shift collectively in how we treat each other and how we deal with things, and how we relate to ourselves and the self-care we give us. Even the great faiths and religion and like love the Lord God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself, everything's predicated upon you have to spend time with yourself and truly love yourself, not in a selfish way, but just knowing who you are at your core so that you can love those other people is so important. So that would be the practice every day I would want people to do.
Amazing. Love it. You work with humans, but you also work with dogs. Who do you prefer to work with?
I really enjoy coaching and working with people. I just do. I love hanging out with dogs. Don't get me wrong. I think dogs are fan-frickin-tastic. I love hanging out with dogs, but my heart is really for people big time. And so I definitely prefer the people. Psychologically, people tend to be much more complex if you boil it down, just because like animals don't have egos. I mean, they can act like jerks sometimes, but there's not this 15 layers, onion layers of emotional issues, and it's defense mechanism stacked upon rationalization, defense mechanism, rationalization, all surrounded by a huge ego. Dogs are much easier to rehabilitate and to bring through things like trauma than people, because they can let things go instead of obsessing over their stories and holding on to that. And it's like, I don't know, with people, sometimes you just have to ask them, what's more important to you? Holding on to that story as part of your identity, or having the life you want? Because you're not going to have both. Dogs, you don't necessarily have to go through a lot of that process with. And that's one of the beautiful things, that people can look at dogs every day and just be reminded that is a creature that has mastered being present.
I love it. That's awesome. That's such a great way to think about it. So what's your favorite breed of dog?
I'm actually glad you asked that. I don't have a okay. So the truth is, I don't have a favorite breed of dog. My preferred breed of dog at the moment is are pit bulls, but that's just because they're the maligned breed, at least in the US of the day, right? And so it's one of those things where it's more, I appreciate being an advocate, but then my favorite breed would probably change 10 years from now when it becomes something else that is in the public eye, that gets the most media attention, and so it's more of an education thing. Honest to God, my favorite dog is just the one that I connect with the best, and the dog that connects with their people the best. And that's not about breed any more than for people. It's about, well, I hang out with these people because they share my beliefs and they come from where I come from. It's like, nope, I just want somebody that's genuine and got a great spirit about them. That's the person that I want to connect with. The outer stuff is just the costume people are kind of wearing to the party. You're really looking for, again, that draw, the relationship. That's the piece that I think is number one.
Very true. Very true. Well, and the point about dogs being like so present and just there, so I just think just dogs are so happy that they I don't have one yet. Me and my girlfriend have a goal. We're going to get a red Cavapoo puppy. And we were talking about this last night as we were laying in bed. We were like, I'm going to be so much more present when I get a dog, because I'm going to be constantly like checking they're okay and just being aware of them around me all the time. And I think that'll be really beneficial for me. Obviously, I should develop some self awareness and presenteeism without a dog, but I think that will definitely resonated.
Absolutely, man.
Brian, this has been an absolute pleasure. We're coming up on time, but would you like to share where people can follow you and find you?
Yeah, best place to connect with me is go into bergfordperformance.com, my website, and Bergford is spelled like Berg, iceberg, Ford, like the car company. So, um, if an iceberg and a Ford car had a love child, that would be my last name. So bergfordperformance.com. And there's an app that I have that's full of a ton of stuff for free, the Bergford Performance Systems app. When you sign up and get on my email list, you get access to all that. I spent a ton of time, energy, money putting that together, but I wanted people to have incredible resources. So that's a place to do it. Social media is beyond what I would consider a necessary evil. I don't even know what to call it. So I'm on social media, but if you actually really want to stay in contact, be on my email list, be the best way to do it.
Cool. Brian Bergford, Berg, iceberg, and Ford, Ford.
You got it.
Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, I've loved every moment of it. Alex, thank you for having me, my friend. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, just don't hesitate.